Hello my dear students, myself Gangadhar Solanki and I welcome you all to the MCGM's virtual classroom. Today we are going to start with the subject political science. Up to standard 8th we learnt civics with history, that is history and civics in standard 6th, 7th and 8th. In civics, we have studied local self-government institutions, India's constitution and our governmental structure. Now in this class, we are going to study India's relations with the world and some major global issues. That is what in political science. On the screen you can see the cover page of our textbook History and Political Science. And our first chapter in this is post-World War political developments. Now one important thing which we have to understand here is about interdependence. We are dependent on different persons, institutions and organizations in the society for different reasons and for different facilities. As we know, man is a social animal and that is why we are dependent on each other. जैसे हमारे नेबर्स होते हैं, हमें उनसे कुछ ज़रूरत होती है, उनको हमसे कुछ ज़रूरत होती है, हम उनसे कुछ लेते हैं, उन्हें कुछ देते हैं, and the same thing happens. Same thing is like about institutions and organizations. जैसे स्कूल है which is our need. Interdependence is what? The relationship between two or more living things where each one benefits from the other. It may be in the form of exchange of things or interaction between the people. हम एक दूसरे से कुछ चीज़ें लेते हैं, देते हैं या फिर हमारा एक दूसरे के साथ कुछ ना कुछ interaction होता है. So exchange and interaction, two things very important. Our social life is interdependent and mutual cooperation has a very important place in it. Now when we talk about interdependence, it is not only about the individual or about any particular person, but like individuals or like society, it applies to different nations as well. Some exchange and interaction goes between nations. Even big and prosperous or developed nations have to depend upon other big and small nations for different needs, for different purposes. So all the countries of the world are dependent on each other for one reason or the other. It may be for raw material, it may be for market purpose, or it may be for any other purpose. Every nation has policies about its internal dealings, as also about its relation with other nations, such as in different international treaties. And all these things are come under the heading of foreign policy, about which we have to study in detail in the next chapter, which is the progress of India's foreign policy. But here we are going to talk about the post-World War political development. Now the question is, why to study all these things about war and all that? To understand today's world, we need to go back to history. Because today's world has been shaped through many events and developments, and if we talk about last century, then in that World War First and World War Second totally changed the world. And then after the concept of interdependence was focused, countries around the world depend on each other for goods, एक दूसरे से कुछ चीज़ें लेनी होती है, or for raw material or to make goods, and markets to sell goods. This has led to globalization, the development of a world culture. Some people fear globalization will cause people to lose their own culture. But now there is no option for this, or no any other option, because globalization is the thing now which we can't neglect. And now the world war, why we have to study all these things? We are a generation who have never lived through a major war, and that's why we should study. War affects everyone, not only the soldiers fighting for their country, but the people, those back at home. War changes the course of history. It totally changes the history. It can destroy countries, create new ones, or cause countries to take a different path. War changes individual lives. A whole generation of young British men were wiped out. If we do not understand the past, we will end up repeating the mistakes of the past, and that is what we study history. Why we study history? Not to repeat the mistakes. जो गलतियाँ इतिहास में हुई है वही फिर से नहीं करनी है, इसलिए हम इतिहास को पढ़ते हैं. So, World War First, which caused a tremendous loss of life and property, and which changed the world. Two things are there, positives and negatives, that we have to discuss. The First World War was fought between 1914 and 1918. Not only the countries which joined the war, but also the countries which did not join the war were impacted by the war. Major countries of Europe took part in it, because Europe was at center of the world. The economies of the various as well as the losing countries collapsed. Economies of the victorious as well as the losing countries collapsed. Not only the losing countries but the victorious also. Countries involved in the First World War divided into two powers, Allied powers and Central powers. At the end of the First World War, all the nations felt that such a war should not happen again, and some measures need to be taken to achieve that end. Now here the countries in Allied powers: Britain, France, Russia, Italy, America. And in Central powers: Germany, Austria, Hungary, Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria. Causes of World War First: pride in one's country, that is nationalism. Want to defend their country in time of war. Think they are better than others. After the end of First World War, all the nations felt that such a war should not happen again and some measures need to be taken to achieve that end, and in that Woodrow Wilson played an important role. And to stop all these things, League of Nations was established in 1920, composed of 42 participants, aimed to reduce weapon, to settle the conflicts among nations, and to implement projects. If you talk about the aims and objectives of League of Nations, it was to establish world peace and security, to establish friendly and cooperative relations between the nations, to solve the international issues with peace, avoiding the wars. But League of Nations did not succeed at preventing war. In the list of aims and objectives, we can add obeying the international law. All the member nations are secular and independent, and for the sake of national security, all should follow the rule of League of Nations. But as I told you, it was established after the First World War to establish peace, but it did not succeed at preventing war. And after the First World War, major changes came about in Europe and outside Europe. Europe collapsed and new nations came into being. League of Nations failed at preventing war. All these developments culminated in the Second World War. The Second World War was fought between 1939 and 1945. It proved to be far more destructive than the First World War. And it was because more advanced technology which was employed in this war. Countries which took part in the Second World War once again faced a situation of economic crisis. Here in Second World War, America played a major role. Then the next thing, the Second World War ended with the defeat of Germany in Europe and of Japan in Asia. Among the many events that took place in the beginning of the Cold War, 1945 to 1991 is the long period of the Cold War.